All right, TJ, how are you, man? I I've thrown you into the deep end of this live stream pool because I didn't know we were going to live stream until like the last minute, and I was like, "Hey, TJ, you know this podcast? Can we try to live stream?" And you're like, "Sure." So, how are you?
I'm doing great, Matthew. It's almost Christmas break. We've waited a long time to get here, but you know what? We've done a lot this year. I'm good. I feel grounded today. I feel happy today. I feel grateful today.
And we actually just had our half day in my school district. And if you see I look like a hot mess, it's because I was in a blow up Santa outfit for 2 hours, dancing and celebrating and just having a good time. We did selfies with Santa. We're virtual. But we did selfies with Santa through the cars. And man, let me tell you, we were planning on like 50 cars. I'm not joking you. 150 people in cars showed up, and it was awesome. So yeah, we're there, and I'm there with you, and I feel the same. I'm glad we're on that same wavelength. So let's get in. Let's jump in. And as always, this podcast is going to be on our normal podcast platform, but we are streaming it today. So we're going to see how that goes. But anyway, Tell me about TJ. What's the TJ Rumler story?
So I'll start by just letting you know kind of where I am now, and then we'll, like those movies where you're like, you start and you see the beginning, and it's like 3 days ago. So we'll kind of do that. Right now, I wear a few different hats, not including this one, but the main job I have right now, I work full time for Greenville County School District down here in Greenville, South Carolina. One of the biggest school districts in the whole country. I believe 44th right now. We have about 76,000 students, over 100 locations and schools. So I'm the trauma-informed specialist there as a licensed independent clinical social worker. I will make it very clear, though, for anybody listening, like I'm not speaking on behalf of the school district. I have to say that.
Nice.
But I also own a consulting business where I do very similar work, trauma-informed work for both educators and for entrepreneurs. I've done things for like real estate agents and just, independently licensed social workers or therapists or things like that. And then so I also do independent therapy through an agency called BetterHelp. People that listen to Spotify, you've probably heard their ads here recently. They've been blowing up ads on Spotify. And it's completely 100% telehealth where you can do it. Either you can chat with your therapist or, message or live chat like we're doing right now. So I keep some clients on the side by doing that. Been doing social work for about 10 years now. I couldn't imagine doing anything else other than just serving people and helping people, reach this sounds so cliche, but a better version of themselves. And that's kind of what we get to do every day. But my journey is a lot different in my experience than a lot of folks who end up in the world of clinical work and educators. I have noticed that a lot of folks that end up in the helping field kind of knew that's what they wanted to do, right? They went to college, got their undergrad, maybe master's, and they've been doing that job from then till now. And I counted here recently, I was journaling, and I think I've had somewhere between 40 and 50 jobs in my life. Anywhere from, work. My first job was at McDonald's to sales. I worked in auto sales for about 5 years. Also did 4 years in the Army. I'm a combat veteran. I've just done all kinds of things to work in retail. I was an Abercrombie and Fitch guy one time, sold the cars. I sold the clothes. I definitely wasn't the model. But just all kind of things. But what I love, what I'm grateful for, I should say, is because I still landed where I am, because of the job I have now. I say a lot that there's not many things that my clients have been through, that my students are going through, that I can't find some way to tap into the feelings that they're experiencing. If I haven't been through exactly what you've been through, pretty doggone close sometimes. And that helps me to just be a little bit more empathetic. There's also a lot of transferable skills that I gathered along the way. And what I've noticed as I look back over my life, from in a previous life and working in a church, doing youth ministry, to the military, to volunteering with agencies like the JCs and Hispanic Alliance, there's always been this thread of service. And I didn't know it as I was going along. And then one day, one of my friends actually sat me down and really wanted to hear the answer and asked me a question just like you did just now. What's your story? Like, what made you want to become a social worker? And even things like examples of poor mental health that I saw personally and through friends, during my time in the military. Just all these little things that were woven throughout that story, throughout my life, have kind of landed me here. And the way I ended up in social work, and I'll tell you this because I kind of think this is a cool story because it ties back into education. I was working doing mortgages. I was like a mortgage originator. And I got into that field like right as the real estate market was tanking back in what, 07, 08 or what. I mean, it was really bad time to be trying to do mortgages. And my stepsister ended up, she went to the same high school I did, several years younger. And I went to her graduation at obviously the high school where I graduated from. And now they were called guidance counselors now, but then the school counselor was in attendance, and she was like one of my moms when I was in school. There's 3 or 4 women who I still will always consider them my secondary mothers. And she came up to me and she just was checking in, and I told her what I was doing, and she just, like only a mom would do, not necessarily school, but she just grabbed me, figuratively speaking. She just jerked me up. Why did you not finish your degree? Like you're always so smart, et cetera, et cetera. And I told her what I was doing, and she said, well, you like serving. And she told me about a program at a university here in the upstate of South Carolina at Southern Wesleyan University. It was a night program for human services, and the logistics of it lined up really well. I'm kind of an impulsive guy. I know we know each other, but I don't know if you know me well enough to know that. But so the next day I went up to the school, looked into it, and I was like, you know what the heck? And I signed up. I didn't even know what social work was at the time, but I just kind of signed up, went through that degree. And immediately, I had my first job in this field, my second semester in the program. I was just, knew the right people, I guess, and never looked back. Went straight on and did a master's in social work, decided I wanted the MSW degree, and have had the blessing, the opportunity, just the grateful experience to be able to have a lot of different roles within this field, from working at the VA with fellow veterans to working with nonprofits here in Greenville, to working at one of the largest healthcare providers in the Southeast and doing psychiatric work there, to now back where I truly feel like my sweet spot is, and is serving students. I'm a quote guy, and one of the quotes that really brought me back to this field, because I had worked in education and left and came back, is Frederick Douglass. And I may mess this up a little bit, but you already know in your head, the spirit of it is it's easier to raise a child than to fix a broken man, and that I really do feel that way. And so I kind of took that weird way around to end up where I am now, and I'm loving it.
It's interesting that you shared that journey, because I don't know, think me either. I'm really spontaneous. Like, pick up and move across the country because it just seemed like a good idea. Right. And ironically, I met my wife on a spontaneous drive from Oklahoma to St. Louis to go to a Halloween party. That's how I met my wife. And it's just, sometimes that spontaneity is really beneficial, right? And being able to navigate. And so I connect to that. And of course I see your bike in the back behind you. So, I definitely, that's definitely in my wheelhouse. But so let's get into the meat of this podcast of trauma-informed education. As a social worker, I'm sure you've watched this movement happen and go, yes. So many social workers are like, we've been talking about this for years. So many school counselors are like, we've been telling you for years. And so right now, in the midst of what we're in, and I live in Tennessee, we have the highest rate of COVID positivity in the world per capita, in the world. And so we're talking about this pandemic, this beast that's rolling through education and the impact. And so, one thing that I think you're concerned about, and I'm concerned about too, is true teacher wellness and self-care. Talk to me about what you've been doing in that area, and why this is important, and some recommendations.
Okay, that's a lot. But you're right. And we were chatting earlier that it's the number one thing that's on my mind. I do believe that we have to be student-centered in education, but I also believe we can't do that unless we're teacher first. My friend Kara Foster Lee, and she always says, and I know she borrowed this quote from someone, and I don't know who said it, but hungry teachers will eat their children. And I think they're way past hungry. I think they're just burnt out, exhausted. They're dealing with exhaustion. They're dealing with compassion fatigue. I've never, and you've been in this field a whole lot longer than me, but I've never seen anything like specifically teachers and administrators. And, you're in that boat too. Just the level of I think just trying to tread water right now. In our district specifically, I'm very proud of the flexibility that our district has used in trying to make the right call, the best right call that you can, to give people options. And in such a large school district, that's not always that easy. But one of the things that they did, we created our own virtual school to give some students the option to do that. But for the ones that still decided to stay and go in that, part e-learning, part in-person hybrid model, a lot of those teachers are having to do both of those. And that's just a lot, man. I can't imagine. I'm calling on you to stop me if I start getting too tangential, okay? But I go back to even before COVID, and I serve a lot of different schools in my role. I'm not in one school. I probably should have explained my role a little bit better. I can go back to that if you want me to. But I serve a lot of different schools, and it just amazes me the things that, and I'll only speak to myself because I don't want to put anybody on blast, but just the fact that I get to take a lunch break and I can stop at a restaurant and grab a sandwich. And then when I am trying to work with United Way or, some of our other partners on a teacher giveaway, and I'm like, what would you like? And I hear a duty-free lunch would be amazing. That's just the norm, the everyday baseline normal when we're not having to deal with a pandemic. It's you're walking around so stressed out with so many stressors, attacking you on a daily basis, that now you also, we got to have an e-learning curriculum. Also, I have to try to figure out a way to keep students engaged and build relationships and form new relationships with students I've never met like this, in Zoom meetings. And my heart just goes out to them. We could sit here and talk about stories all day long, but I have found one of the ways that I've noticed, I felt just kind of intuitively, wow, this is different. It's obvious, but from my perspective, is I do a lot of trainings. I do a lot of coaching. One of the things that I was able to try to pilot this year through our district, and I was super excited, I'm still super excited about it, is something called staff support sessions. And it's not therapy. Make that very clear. But it's where I partner with United Way through a program called On Track Greenville that's actually who pays my salary. Great program, by the way. We can talk about that later if you want, if we have time. But it's where teachers can go on a platform that we're using for scheduling and sign up for a 30-minute individual session or an hour group session. And we just talk about relationship building, self-care, trauma-informed strategies, all these different things that, how can I help you? Yeah. Sometimes maybe you just need to vent and bounce some stuff off somebody, right? That was the intention. And Matthew, I've had 3 scheduled, and I launched it a month ago, 3 scheduled and 2 had to cancel because of duties in school. And it's just and again, this is not, I want to be very explicit because this is recorded. Not that's no blame to the school.
No, of course not.
You know what I mean? It's just, there's so much that people are having to deal with right now. It's I'm sitting on the other end of I don't know. Sometimes I don't know how to serve you right now without it feeling like something else on your plate.
And that is a valid thought. And I was reading in a social media group, and it was matter of fact, I put a quote up, and it said I said that this year isn't the year to determine whether if you're not a good principal, right? And it was a principal group, and somebody posted in, and it was an educator, and it was admin need to understand this is happening, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened, this happened. It was a teacher, and she was really frustrated. And so as an administrator, I step back and I think, and my assistant principal and we both are 100% in unity in this, in that my whole role is to support the teachers to the nth degree. If they say they need chart paper, I'm ordering it. If they say they need somebody to come in their room, we're coming in. If they say they need a minute to deal with a family, we're going to be backing them up. And that's my instructional coaches. That's everybody. Because right now, the last thing educators and teachers need is something else. And I hear what you're saying. And outside of COVID, I bet you people would be like, oh man, this would be great. But the intensity and the amount of work teachers are asked to do is really incomprehensible. People do not realize, unless they're in a school or they're on these Zoom meetings, watching teachers shine like nothing I've ever seen before. I mean, killing it. My teachers, I go into a lesson and I just sit back and I'm like, I mean, they look like they've been doing this for 25 years. And it's just amazing what they've accomplished. So that is amazing that resource is there from your school district. Honestly, I'm going to take it to mine. We have a trauma-informed team on the district. I think it's brilliant. What are some other things that you can say, hey, educators, teachers, because, when we talk self-care, everybody wants to talk about, oh, go get a glass of wine, go get your nails done. We're talking like true self-care, processing the stress around and with people that get it. What are some other things that stand out to you?
Okay, so there's a couple of things in there, and I'll tell you, that's been by far the most requested training that I've had from both in the school district, from different principals around the district to, other districts, just by far since April, May. Can you talk to us about self-care? And I don't. There's a quote. I feel bad because I keep saying quotes and I don't remember. I can't remember off the top of my head who to cite. But there's a quote from an article that says, "True self-care is not about salt baths and chocolate cake. It's about building a life you feel like you don't need to escape from." And what I take from that, and I always want to lead people through, is to try to do things that may not sound sexy, but like before you reach that point of burnout. I highly recommend a book I'm reading right now. Brene Brown had these authors on her podcast. If your listeners listen to her podcast, and it's just called Burnout. And I think it's Interrupting the Stress Cycle or Understanding the Stress Cycle. And in that book, the authors do an amazing job of just bringing it down to earth and talking about the difference in a stressor and stress. And a lot of times we forget that. So one thing I would encourage people to know to do is, one, self-care, and to me, in my clinical back, everything it starts with just being present. It starts with learning how to breathe. And don't wait till somebody pisses you off, but learning how to breathe. Take 5 minutes, whether you call it prayer, meditation, whatever it is. If you can do 5 minutes a day and just sit in silence and breathe. Because what you will notice, and if any of y'all listen and do this, hopefully you can attest, is you can't really know when you become jacked up or dysregulated, whatever language you want to use, until you know what it feels like to be well and to be calm and to be regulated. And so the more you can learn, okay, this is what it's like to just be in that window of tolerance, to be calm, to have some, rhythm. It's hard to know when you're like, oh, whoa, I'm getting out of it. So I would say within this conversation, if you take one thing from the conversation that we're having today, is just try to find some time for silence and build some space for breathing in your life. That's number one. And it has to be done preventative,
It's true. And there's all kinds of amazing apps for people who, and obviously I don't have any sponsorships on this, but I've used Headspace quite a bit in the past. And as somebody who is a pretty hyped up person, you can ask my assistant principal. She'll 100% confirm that. I have to make sure I stand in a space of what you just said, because the intensity in which we operate as administrators and educators can get to the point where it's normalized, but it's not actually normal, right? And it's not okay to feel continually overwhelmed all of the time. And I think one thing that we need to talk about too, because I don't think it's talked enough about, and that's grief right now. I think that, we had a little pre-conversation, and I think talking about grief and losing things that we had in education and we had in the classroom. Talk to me about that, about grief, and how you see that playing a role right now in education, especially around trauma-informed education.
Sure. And I've heard a lot of other giants in the field, and I always give a shout out to Brene Brown, but there's several people that I've heard talk about a concept called comparative grief. And it's a very dangerous thing. And I want to, kind of preface by this is a very nuanced topic. I'll explain what I mean. So comparative grief is the pitfall or the quicksand, if you will, of getting stuck and feeling like I can't feel grief or I can't feel anger or sad over something that I've lost because someone else I perceive has it worse. In our field, that might sound like I shouldn't feel bad that I can't go on my vacation for this Christmas, or I'm sad that X concert got canceled because I know I have students that are at home that might not even have a meal tonight. And I don't think anybody would argue like, yeah, I probably shouldn't compare those. Like they are very different. But emotion is emotion, and it's a biological thing. And if I can promise you one thing, pain is going to find a way to be felt. And stress is going to find a way to make it through your body. And that's I go back to that book, Burnout, and they talk about how the emotion of stress it's going to go somewhere. So if you've lost, and I say if, we've all lost something, at least something during COVID, whether that's actually losing someone you love, losing time, losing experiences that you banked on. I mean, and I'll model, like I'm single, I have no kids, and I have a horrible case of wanderlust. And I travel and I love concerts. I think it's in my bio. Buy the tickets, and I got sad when all these concerts started getting canceled. Now, did I go and whine and complain about that on Facebook and make it a public post? No. But I sure talked about that with my closest friends. And I processed it and I acknowledged that feeling and I sat with it. Because I think we don't always know that we have the freedom and the permission to feel those things. And it sucks, man. It's horrible when you lose something like that. And on top of just for the last 9 months, we feel like we don't have control. And for anybody, I mean, this is a trauma-informed educator. So hopefully everybody listening has some baseline knowledge of trauma and the effects of trauma. And one of the big things is, taking away that ability to feel like you have control, locus of control, if you will. So those two things go really hand in hand because it's taking away our control and it's taking things literally tangible and intangible from us. Now I'm just rambling now, but I hope if you're listening to this, you take from me the permission to feel grief for these things.
And I don't think you're rambling. I actually think you're making a lot of really good points, honestly, in that, when we started back to school, we started virtually. And then, and there was a lot of course, a feeling of lack of preparedness because we just hadn't done true online learning or virtual learning and, all of these pieces. But when kids came back in October, we realized the grief we were feeling because we are in a relationship, social and emotional connection field. That's what we do, right? You can't have a school without social and emotional health and connection. And connection, although ironically feels like it's real on the virtual world, it's those interactions on the day-to-day basis that we missed. And we had kids back in our school for several months, and man, how it felt. And then it became where it was not safe. So our district is very large. It's 90,000 kids. It became unsafe. The director said it's time to move back. And yet in my school, so almost 55% of kids and their parents chose virtual because safety was a concern. And so when we're in that connection field, right, it's difficult when we get into these spaces of we don't get to see kids. We don't get to see parents. We don't get to have those interactions. And knowing that a lot of kids depend on that and depend on those positive interactions. And a lot of parents depend on us and our positive interactions. And we depend on them, let's be honest. It is. There's a lot that we've lost. But I also want to say that in the stage of disruption like this, right, whether natural or man-made, there's opportunity. And I think too that if in this field of trauma-informed education, if we don't see the opportunity that is presented in front of us, we're missing as well. And I think one of those is when we're talking about equity, right? Yeah. As educators, and I've only worked in Title I schools. That's all I've ever spent my career. That's just where I felt my my field is. And we've all known about inequity. We know it. We know what it feels like, what it looks like, whether it's from what our schools look like to what the resources some of our kids get. But this has exposed that inequity. And I think that that is a positive thing, that finally conversations on a bigger scale are starting to happen about equity. What are your thoughts around that, about the being inequity right now, especially in this exposure phase that COVID has brought out, that every kid doesn't have a laptop and internet?
If I had to sum it in one word, it'd be finally. Like, finally, we're having this conversation, like, honestly and open. Still a lot of work to be done, but I feel like now I can actually have this conversation without people rolling my eyes. I mean, without rolling their eyes. You know what I mean? And I think for a long time it was there. And now people are starting to see, both throughout history, from the way the educational system in this country was built on white supremacy. They're finally starting to, in different levels, acknowledge that, all the way to how that still affects our kids now. And when we talk about equity, it's not just race, it's class, it's, ableism, it's all these, it's gender, definitely. We were talking about that earlier. But I think you're starting to see people who had never, wrong, right, or indifferent, right, wrong, or indifferent, had to see that up close and personal. And I think for a lot of teachers and administrators, specifically, it comes in the form of maybe even seeing your kid's environment of where they're living, what they're having to deal with because you might cognitively understand that I might have one or two kids in my school who they're having to raise their siblings, but it's different when you see that on screen. It's different when you hear parents arguing in the background. It's different when you call a parent, like, why has Johnny not been, in school 5 of the last 10 days? Oh, well, we didn't have power. We didn't have internet. I think you're starting to actually have to face those things up close and personal. Now, what I hope happens with that is that we can also pivot that information to have conversations around inequity and discipline and academic numbers. One of my favorite quotes, and I heard this years ago at an MTSS conference, is, systems produce exactly the results they were designed to produce. And I truly wholeheartedly believe that if we continue to see these huge gaps in areas, what is the old teacher quote? What is if one student fails, they need to study more. If all your students fail, then you need to teach different, or something like that.
Right.
I feel that way about the education system as a whole. If we continue to have these students, we use discipline for an example. If, nationally, something like 13% to 15% of all public school students are Black males, yet they're getting 40 to 50% of all out of school suspensions. That's just one example. That's not okay. And I'll challenge anybody that's listening, because I would love to hear a third or a fourth or fifth option. To me, when you look at numbers that are that just sickening to me, and I'll say this too, if you compare that to the adult prison population, it's the same. It's almost exactly the same. Is that you have to walk away with one or two conclusions. Either one, we're doing something really wrong and unethical and evil here, basically, knowingly or not, or Black boys are just worse. They're just worse kids. And I'm not buying that one. So if anybody has a different conclusion that maybe has some nuance to, I'm open to hear it, but that's just, I don't know, man. It's a lot. The equity conversation, we're just getting started.
Well, and I know we mentioned earlier on our pre-conversation about the Push Out, the book and the documentary. They had a free screening this last week, and I was able to watch it. And statistically, we like to talk about boys of color, predominantly Black, right? But what we're learning statistically is Black girls are statistically as likely, 4 times more likely to be suspended than a white female. There's these statistics that when we're talking about equity, especially racial equity, we've got to have these conversations, and they're uncomfortable. And guess what, TJ? You and I are two white dudes having this conversation, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and the point is, we've got to bring people into this conversation who have been on that side. One of my great friends, he's actually a principal in my district. He's going to be on here, Ricky Gibbs. He was a statistic. Now, I'm sorry, Dr. Gibbs, I should say. He was a statistic. He was the kid that was almost put in alternative school, kicked out. And his story is powerful, but unfortunately, it's a story of so many people where he was perceived as a bad kid, right? And at the end of the day, when we're talking about the place we're in right now, right? Yeah. We're in a virtual space. We don't have kids getting behavior referrals because they're ripping up classrooms, right? I mean, this is the time to start having conversations around what are we going to do differently. At my school, I have openly told my staff, we're not suspending kids. It's just not what we do, right? I think we had one last year, and that was because we had to have a day to come up with a plan. It wasn't because we were punishing the child. Sure. But what we have done is we've got multiple social workers. I have a therapeutically trained school counselor. We have resources. We've provided support for educators around what do we do instead. We have peace corners, de-escalation strategies, emotional vocabulary lessons every day, right? It takes a paradigm shift. And I think right now is that time to start. If you have not started that work, now is the time to look into it. As we've had a natural disruption, when we come back, it's going to be okay to be an unapologetic disruptor, right? Be unapologetic and say, no, we're going to do it differently. And so getting more into the equity piece, right? Because I think we have to dig more. Race 100%. But you mentioned some other pieces that I think we don't talk enough about either. And so talk about those. You mentioned poverty and gender and talk about some of those.
Sure. And before I do, I'm not going to let you, but because you tried to be too humble there, I'm going to give you a shout out, because going back to the teacher self-care thing, absolutely, it's failing our children, our teachers, whoever that user is, that comment. When I visited your school, that's where I met you a few years ago when we visited from Greenville to Nashville. One of the things that I think several of our administrators in Greenville are using now, because we saw in your school, was is tap in and tap out. Is that what it's called?
Yep.
And like, honestly, I think sometimes we overthink this work.
Yeah,
but,
true.
You know, I've got on one of my presentations on exclusionary discipline, I've got this long flow chart of how it can go from what behavior, the initial behavior, whatever behavior we're defining from a student, all the way down to that kid ending up incarcerated. And I'm like, but in between the behavior, there's the adult interpretation or misinterpretation. And if we can just teach an adult how to like breathe right here in this first step, you know how many we can stop right there? And that's one way you're helping your staff do that.
It's the opportunity to respond between the stimulus, or that gap between stimulus and response, right? And Guy Stevens was on this podcast just a few, I guess about a month ago, whose child is on the autism spectrum and went through awful experiences in school, and it was because the educators didn't understand the triggers and the disability necessarily. And it came down to control, right? Controlling situations, but I need you to do this and you're not, so I'm going to have to control. And as an administrator who openly says, I started my my principalship in an awful way, where I was principaling the way I thought principals were supposed to principal, and realized this isn't working for me, my teachers, or my students. It isn't about control, right? And I think one thing that you said, it's about empathetic connection of going, wait a minute, what's going on here? Let me give you an example. I was in a training and it was all about the behavioralist ideas of what are they seeking? Attention, to get away. Right. What was the, and so I gave the scenario and I asked the facilitator that same question. What was the child seeking? And they gave a couple ideas, and I said, actually, no, they were going to be homeless tomorrow. Like that was the behavior. That was what the cause of the behavior was. The child was about to be put out of her hotel, and she knew it. And so she came to school and was completely stressed out. But if we only look at behavior as a function, right? This is something they're doing. We're missing so many marks, and we're going to have kids coming back that are going to have experienced a lot of different things. And we're talking socially too, right? Our
Yes.
culture right now is just, everything is so intense. And so, I mean, it's so deep when we're talking about equity and these pieces in education.
And something you just said, I think this is worth mentioning too, because this is a very difficult and uncomfortable conversation to have, especially if you're new to this work, especially if you're a white straight man new to this work. I mean, because you're going to have a lot of toes stepped on. But just like you said, you were principling the way you knew how to principle. What we want is for everybody to join this work and to join this conversation and work towards equity. What gets in the way of that a lot of times is shame and blame. So whether it's somebody else trying to do that, or what I've learned that we do great is place that on ourselves. So if you're new to this conversation, if you're like, hey, you know what, I recognize that we got to start having conversations in my school, in my district, about race, about equity, about inclusion, diversity. What I would encourage you to try to do is sit with that discomfort, but don't let it when you start feeling like, I can't believe we used to do things that way. Yeah, that's great, you did, but it's time to move forward. Because if you sit in that stuff too long, it can turn into guilt, and then you start making it about me, and then nothing ever changes. That's what that turns into, like putting a picture on Instagram. We stand with you, and then nothing changes. Your board still looks the same. Your leadership team still looks the same. Your discipline numbers still look the same. Mm-hmm. But I put a picture on Instagram. So just learn how to be comfortable in that discomfort and realize that it's going to be some hard work.
I think that's great advice. And, we shouldn't be comfortable.
Right.
I think, I've said it 1,000 times. We're not trying to fix broken kids. The kids aren't broken. We're actually trying to fix broken systems. And as that system as we begin to try to shift the paradigm of what we see is wrong, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? And so I think standing in a discomfort is a place that so many people, unfortunately, that are in all the time naturally, right? By no choice of their own. And it's okay for us to be in that all of the time, standing with people and validating their voices and letting them lead the way in a lot of these areas, because there's so many people who are, and there's so much happening in this movement around trauma-informed education and equity and social justice and racial justice. It all fits under the same umbrella. And I think that's important that people know. There's a lot of people out there doing great work. But until we're having these conversations of racial equity, historical trauma, and in this trauma-informed education, we're just not going to continue to push the work in the directions it needs to be. So what do you see this work looking like in the next 5 years? What do you see trauma-informed education looking like?
And before I forget, you mentioned I don't know if you said what word you said, but basically generational trauma. If you haven't read this book, or if you're listening and you haven't read the book, My Grandmother's Hands, put it at the top of your list. Like, that book is by another therapist, another licensed social worker, Resma Minicum, and he is brilliant. And he takes a somatic and cognitive approach to looking at historical racial trauma. And I'm just going to leave it at that. No spoilers. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, but I'm writing it down.
Yeah, get it. What do I see this work looking like in the next 5 years? I think exciting, because I feel what I see in my sphere of influence, and I'm interested to see where you land on this. I feel like we're kind of reaching this precipice where there's got to be like, what's the next step? Because a lot of people have, thank God that, for the majority, I think, of educators, or at least a good number, have a general working knowledge of adverse childhood experiences, of, some basic, neuroscience. They understand. I think probably at least 5 out of 10 Educators could tell you what the amygdala is. You know what I mean? Some of this really working knowledge now, which is great. And what I keep hearing is, all right, what's next? But when I go to conferences, a lot of time, and I've been guilty of this too, is like, all right, we're just kind of all sharing the same information around. And a lot of time, but on one hand, it's not as high in the clouds as we think. It's really walking around like taking care of yourself and just not being a jerk sometimes.
True.
But you know what I mean? So maybe I guess I just kind of skated all the way around the ice rink to get to application, to actually saying, all right, I understand that maybe this isn't like fireworks and fancy billboards. It's me sitting and meditating for 5 or 10 minutes a day. Maybe it's me, the little phrase Q-tip. Maybe it's learning to quit taking it personally, to understand that this behavior it has nothing to do with me. Going back to what you said with control, understanding that as hard as it is to admit, I can't control a child. I can't control a teacher in my building or an administrator or my social worker. I can only control me. It's some of those things that we talk about really well. But until we do that stuff when we're okay, and until we do it on a regular basis, when somebody's behavior pisses me off, that's out the window. And that's one of the things I love about this My Grandmother's Hands in this book. You do work. Like, this is not a book you're going to sit and read over the weekend. If you do, you did it wrong, because you really do some hard work. And, the author, he uses examples of educators, of police officers, of he has chapters. This is speaking more to my white family, to my black family. But basically, we can do all this trauma-informed work. We can do all this, racial implicit bias work, inclusion. But if you can see, as Dan Siegel says, when I flip my lid, that doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can't stay here, if I can't stay regulated, and that stuff doesn't matter. So I'd say application and starting from within and working out, I hope, is the next 5 years of trauma-informed education.
I mean, I think that's spot on, honestly. And I think, too, the opportunity of innovation.
Yeah.
People can't. And here's what I think is so interesting. And I've literally traveled internationally and around this country speaking. And I tell people, I'm not going to tell you anything profound. All I'm going to tell you is we tried. And we tried some things, honestly, TJ, that weren't good, right? We tried like having kids go to when Edutopia did our video that was viewed 7 million times. We had it that kids went to Peace Corners to fill out a feedback form. Wrong. We had it wrong. That's not what they should be doing. What we realized is on the process of this is they need to regulate, right? Or be co-regulated. They needed somebody to help them. And so that's the progress. It's just try it. I think people are waiting for a program that's going to come in and it's just going to do it. There is no program. And what I also say is this is a mindset. It's who you are. It's what you do. This isn't something somebody's going to teach you, right? And it's a journey that we all have to be on. I've had it wrong many times, right? I've had it wrong. And I've learned from people like you and people like Bruce Perry and Ross Green and all the other people who have been on this podcast of going, we got to stand in a space and going, And I think what I call it is habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood, right? Just listen. And I think another big thing, TJ, that we have to, as practitioners in this field, we have to be cognizant of is everybody's in a different space on this continuum of a journey, right? And there is no finish line. We're not going to run across the finish line and say, I'm the most trauma-informed educator that's ever been trauma-informed. No. People are in different spaces in this continuum, and we need to respect that. And so in 5 years, what I see is everybody knowing what co-regulation is. I see it in that Peace Corners are going to be normalized in schools, that we're talking about emotional vocabulary as if it's another part of reading, math, science, and social studies. Like, that's what I hope to, where kids can say, I'm frustrated right now, instead of saying I'm mad, because mad and frustration are two different things, right? But when we're in elementary schools, kids can say happy, mad, sad, hungry. That's it. And so it's pushing this work forward, and 100% I'm with you. It's about the adults. It's about our operating systems, how we operate, and how we move forward in this field. So I have one more question for you.
Right, drop the mic. You need to pick the mic up and drop it.
Listen, I told you I wasn't going to talk, but you got me on fire here. I just got really fired up, but it's true. You know?
If y'all were listening audibly, like I'm a chronic snapper. Like I'm over here like, yes, man, bring it.
Hey, you snap until your fingers go raw. We just, at the end of the day, I get fired up about this. And I just left today on winter break, the most proud principal I've ever been, with a faculty and staff that is the most remarkable that I've ever been able to work with. And they've got me fired up. I left today on a high of highs of the accomplishments that they have. So I'm going to blame it on my amazing staff for keeping me on fire, because I owe them all of this. So speaking of awesome staff and things, what do you want educators to know? What do you want all of the educators right now to know from you?
One is that you do have advocates out there. I know sometimes especially when you're in your classroom, and I can't speak, I have no idea what it's like to be a classroom teacher. So I don't know. I can only imagine be like, I had went and worked in classrooms before, like to do more social emotional learning lessons for one day. And then I was like, I need a week off. Like that was one day. So what I want you to know is that there are people, there's two of us on the podcast right now that see you, that see the hard work you're doing, the struggle that you're having. And I'm not here and not trying to say, great job, keep it going. Like like, no, this is hard. And that we're out there fighting for you. We're advocating for you. And it's okay to just say that this has been a tough year. This is the TJ position, like everything I've said on here. But one of the things that I always try to remind people is, yes, we need to hold high expectations for ourselves, for the students we're working with. But at the same time, when we say students are falling behind, they're falling behind standards that we created. So we also have the ability to shift those based on a pandemic that we are going through. There was a quote, Matthew, on your page this week on the paradigm shift, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something like, teachers don't need PDE right now. They need some TLC. Is that what it was? And so there are people out here, myself included, who are advocating that you're going above and beyond. And I see you, and I'm grateful to be in this work with you.
Man, so that's it. And that's what I think that all of us need to hear, is that we, in the words of High School Musical, we are all in this together. Because honestly, nobody has it figured out perfectly. Nobody's doing it perfectly. Everybody wants to, sell it that it's all done perfectly. And I will tell you, we don't do it perfectly, but man, are we invested in ourselves and each other at my school. And I hope that other schools experience that too. Well, man, thank you so much for spending this. 45 minutes goes by really fast when you stay on fire like us. And I really appreciate your conversation. Please check out TJ's his TED Talk that he did about the school to prison to pipeline. Amazing work. I actually saw that after I had met him and was blown away by that. And so as always, if you're a listener, please follow TJ. TJ, how are they going to follow you on social media?
Probably the easiest thing to do, because everybody has a preference, is if you just want to go to my website, it's TJ Rumler, and that's RUMLER.com. On the front page at the bottom, it's links to all my social, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all that. I love to connect with people. My hat, this is my hat for my business, and it says we. And the concept of that is that we do better together. We stronger than I. So just, find me if you want. I'd love to have continue the global conversation.
Awesome. And I will be ordering that hat off of your website. That is awesome. And if you want to follow me, I am Principalist on Twitter and also Instagram. Great news. I have an amazing national planning team, and we are bringing back the Trauma Informed Educators Network Conference. And it's not official, but it's kind of official. It will most likely be a virtual conference because we do not see things slowing down from now until July. So please keep your ears open for the registration and also a call for proposals for that virtual conference. We already have some amazing people lined up, and I cannot wait to get this community together. So thank you for listening. Thank you, TJ. And as always, please wash your hands, and wear a mask. All right, we're still live, but the podcast is done recording. So if I hit end, you're going to go. But man, thank you so much. Thank you for all of you all who listened and for your comments. This is our first time streaming. We really appreciate people jumping on and commenting, and for your patience of us. Apparently, I kicked myself out, TJ, and didn't even know it. But I came right back, and you were still rocking it.
I didn't know what was going on, but I was like, I'm just going to talk like I'm still on there. So
yeah, you rocked it. And I actually, once I got back in and you were talking, I'm like, it actually would be better if I wasn't on the screen with you. So I removed myself. But thank you. And I appreciate it, man. I will get it edited and ready actually on the podcast platform probably tonight, because I kind of get excited about these things. And all of the users on Facebook and or YouTube, we will try to do these live streams on every recording. My hope is to record every 2 weeks is my goal. And I'm booked until March. So hopefully that will all pan out. Yeah, you got in early and it's awesome. So thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll follow up with you later, and I'll shoot you an email with the podcast once it's up.
All right, brother.
All right. See you.